Hey y'all, this is Garrett Weber-Gale, and you're listening to For the Love of Food, tasty conversations with me, Olympic gold medalist and food enthusiast. We're here to talk with people passionate about food, cooking, health, and nutrition. My goal is to explore their passions and their adventures that led them to success in better health, cooking, and business. And we are going to talk about how their work is changing the world we live in and the way we interact with food. Our first guest is Gavin Kaysen. Gavin is the chef at Cafe Balut in New York City. He has won a ton of acclaim. He was featured in 2007 as one of the best up-and-coming chefs in the country by Food and Wine magazine. He competed at the Bocuse d'Or, which is the Culinary Olympics, in 2007. And he won James Beard Award, which is an extremely prestigious award for cooking. He won the Best New Chef Award in 2007 as well. So super excited to have Gavin on, and here we go. Gavin, thank you so much for coming on For the Love of Food. This is my first podcast. Gotta tell you, I'm pretty nervous actually for this. I feel like I was getting ready for a race this morning as I tweeted you which is quite strange. Totally different doing a podcast from going to a race, and it's funny. When I go to a race, I'm nervous, but I'm so well prepared from doing it for so many years that it's almost an automatic thing. When starting a podcast, you really have no idea what you're doing. But thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
We say in the kitchen that if the butterflies stop coming to you before dinner service, then you know you've either got to change restaurants or change a station, because you always need to be a little bit nervous to be exceptional, you know?
Yeah, that's probably true. And I find when my racing is the best in the pool, I'm nervous. And when I don't have that kind of eye of the tiger, when I don't have the nerves going, I'm definitely not primed up and ready to rip like I would be in my best races. So yeah, that's a good point. I read you had a quote that it's so exciting being in the room at Bocuse d'Or with everyone screaming, rooting for their country, that you just wanted to bottle up that energy because it's so addicting. And I know really in swimming, I live for those moments where you have an opportunity and an environment that is so exciting, your adrenaline is pumping, everything you've ever worked for has come to this point where you're having the opportunity to really fulfill your dream. And the interesting part is that happens so rarely.
You know, really, those fans, so to speak, or those people who are cheering you on every day, those are really your guests. You know, those are the people that you cook for every single day. And when you go out into the dining room, you can actually feel that same sort of energy and that same sort of excitement when you realize that all you've done is simply prepared a meal for them that you never know, that could have changed their lives. I mean, I've cooked meals for people that, you know, I'll give you a story. When I was in San Diego cooking at El Bizcocho restaurant there were some really bad wildfires that swept through our area. This was in 2006. And so we had a lot of families staying in the hotel, and we had this family, a son and a daughter and their parents, and they ate at the restaurant. And I went out and said hello, and it was just a very simple meal. We cooked scallops. We had all these things that we sent out to them, and we took great care of them. What's crazy is I got an email from the mother about a year ago, 8 months ago, saying, I don't know if you remember us, but you cooked this amazing meal for us. You inspired my son so much that he's going to culinary school now.
Wow.
You know, that's incredible. I mean, to me, that's like, that's the stuff that you just always want to remember and kind of bottle up. That's the energy that we feed off of. And, you know that feeling. You understand what that is because you're a competitor. So you know that, you know, you live for those moments every 4 years. Whereas like for us, you know, we live for every single night and every single service. And when we have the opportunity to do it in front of an international stage, I mean, that's priceless. You know, I mean, that's stuff that you can't make up.
It is interesting, and my fascination with chefs and cooking really started. I actually went to Charlie Trotter's and had dinner in 2006 as a gift from someone, and I remember my emotion and excitement. I mean, there were times I wanted to cry or jump up and down and go crazy because I'd never heard or seen anyone do stuff like this. I mean, his food was some of the best in the world for a long time. And I met him after our dinner, and I thought to myself, wow, this guy has such a unique ability to really affect people's emotions and give them an experience that they might not be able to get anywhere else. and he's able to uplift them and nurture people in a way that's so unique. And it is crazy how food is linked so closely to our emotions. I think almost as much or more than anything else in our life.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, and it affects the way that you live, the way that you are, because it's not fuel. It's not something that you just put in your body because you're hungry. There's more to it. There's more behind it. And I think chefs have this incredibly, as you put it, this really great drive and this dedication to kind of be in the kitchen, because it's very much a calling in that sense. And I think that when you become a cook, you don't necessarily do it because it just got thrown to you. You do it because either A, there's something going wrong in your life, and it's the only way that you can express yourself. And a lot of chefs say that. They'll come out and say, well, I lived a really troubled childhood, and then I learned how to cook, and then all of a sudden everything started to get better for me. And it was an outlet for some people. I mean, kitchens are interesting like that. There's a lot of characters that are built in different ways, and when you put them in a kitchen, somehow it works.
It's almost like food is just your medium for making people happy.
Exactly. I mean, and that's a lot of how I got started too. I mean, I remember baking Christmas cookies with my grandmother at the age of 7, and seeing all of my cousins and my brother and all of our neighbors and friends coming in, and they were more excited to get those cookies by the tree than the presents by the tree. And I just remember seeing my grandma's face and how happy that made her. And I thought to myself, how simple is it? You just put butter, sugar, flour, and eggs together, and you make people this happy, And it just kind of seemed so simple to me. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. Like, I can do that. I can make people happy that way.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating thing. It's almost like making other people happy. We're able to make ourselves happy in return. So it's a double win.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to talk to you a bit about taste. It's something that is a little bit elusive, and it's kind of a crazy concept. I remember I went to stage at Danielle for 3 days back in 2009, and I remember the chefs in there, their sense of smell and their sense of taste was insane. I mean, they could pick apart everything. I thought to myself, how are these guys doing this? And I was just kind of getting into cooking in different kitchens around the country or the world, and I was a little bit discouraged, thinking that, man, these guys must just have a gift from the powers that be. But what I really learned is that it's more of repetition, doing it over and over and over. And I know that the guy you worked for named George at Pasta Time in Minnesota, he made you try things 20 times before you said you didn't like it. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you refine your sense of taste, and maybe what trying something over and over and over did, so that maybe you were not just judging something about tasting good or bad, but more of respecting that ingredient for what it is?
Well, I think George taught me a really valuable lesson when it came to the taste, because there's a couple of different ways to look at it. One is taste and one is texture. And some people just texturally don't like things in their mouth and how they feel, and that's something that can be understood a little bit easier. But when somebody tells you that they don't like the taste of it, you have to wonder why they don't like the taste of it. I remember I used to hate pickles. I used to hate mustard, and I didn't like oysters, and it was like all of these things that I never liked. But the reality is that I never had tasted them. And when I mean that, what I mean by that is that I never had tasted them in a way that would have made them taste good. I either had, mustard that was just not real mustard. Maybe it was like a takeoff of mustard, but it wasn't like true Dijon mustard. Or, I hadn't had pickles before that were either homemade or made with care. They were just kind of jarred grocery pickles. And it kind of teaches you how to buy things, in the grocery store too, and what to really look for, because that does make a difference. And when George would say to me, taste it, I would taste it. I don't like it. He said, well, why don't you like it? Well, but it's too acidic. And then he'd say, yeah, but you like orange juice, and that has an acid to it, right? I said, yeah. He's like, so then what's the difference? And so he would break down the elements of taste for me, and it would make me understand what I liked and what I didn't like. And what I realized quickly was that it wasn't that I didn't like it, it's just that I wasn't open to liking that. And so I would kind of force myself to just keep eating it until my palate got adjusted and understood the flavors. And what that ended up doing is it really ended up just kind of training my palate. And it made me understand, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, even the umami taste, and how that can really play a role and affect, the way that you eat, the way that you cook, and all of your senses become so heightened by it. And, George knew what he was doing when he taught me that lesson, because my palate was very young. I was only 16 years old when I started cooking with him. So, and growing up in Minnesota, I mean, for me, everything was in a can. It was canned beets, it was frozen green beans, it was, canned potatoes. I mean, it was like the potato powder to make mashed potatoes.
Yeah,
I didn't really grow up in a home.
spuds.
I didn't grow up in a home. Yeah, the spuds, yeah. I love that stuff.
I remember
but I didn't
the
really
box.
grow up in a home.
That was just such a crazy concept, getting powder in a box and turning to mashed potatoes. Who created that?
I know. Or the shake and bake. You remember shake and bake?
No, I don't.
It was like a potato spuds. I think it had breadcrumbs and like onion powder, and you would put like chicken or something inside, and you shake it in a bag, and then you bake it in the oven as if that's going to create, I don't know what it's going to create, a good dish. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy and sad, the amount of scientific products that we have now that we're quote unquote eating. Although I'm not quite sure that they're real food. But back to the taste. When I was in France, the first thing I staged for 5 weeks at Michel Tragreau's restaurant, La Maison Tragreau in Rouen, which I know you know. I'm sure you've been there. I went there, and Daniel Boulud, who's your mentor, I'm sure, for many years, world famous chef for those listening who don't know. He set this up for me. And Michel, the first day I walked in the kitchen, he said, the most important thing of your experience here is I want you to taste and smell things over and over and over. I don't want you to be afraid of tasting things. And so I walked in, and it was almost like, really taste the best food in the world over and over and over. I mean, all right, I'll do this all day long. And I wasn't afraid of it. And it was kind of crazy, because at the beginning I would go and taste the sauce, and I would just be able to maybe taste beef, and then I would start picking up leeks or carrot or the aromatics that they have in there. And every single day for the 5 weeks, I would taste and I would smell and I would taste and I would smell, and that would evolve more and more, and it became exciting to the point where, like, the 4th or 5th week, I would walk in and I would smell something in the kitchen, and I could kind of have a general idea of what was going on. And it really, really solidified the point to me that no matter if it's swimming or cooking or writing, it is so much about repetition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny about tasting, too, is that when you get to that point where you were with foie gras, is that when you start to taste it and you start to taste the carrots or the leeks, then you also start to taste what it doesn't have. And then you start to ask yourself a different question. Because before, when you begin tasting, the first question that you would mentally ask yourself is, what does it taste like? Or the real first question is, do I like it? Does it taste good? And after a while, and after you taste it, you get past all of those questions, because it's not about you liking it. It's about what's it missing? What does it have? What does it need? What does it not need? And so you start to ask yourself a bunch of different questions about the exact same thing that you used to taste. And it kind of breaks it down in a different way. So that way you can kind of help the cooks evolve. And that's one of the things we pride ourselves on here at Cafe Boulud, is to say, guys, you have to taste your food. And when you go through a recipe with anybody, with any cook, whether it's the lowest on the totem pole or the highest sous chef in the totem pole, you have to say to them, let's taste the whole process. Because you learn it too. I mean, it's not, you don't become a chef and then all of a sudden you know how to do everything. I mean, I learn more every single day in my job now than I probably did when I was a line cook, in Switzerland or in London or in California. Because, here as a chef, you get to collaborate. I mean, we have 32 cooks in our kitchen, so I get to collaborate with 32 people on a daily basis and help answer their questions and help figure out solutions and ask them questions. And, they're from a lot of different nationalities, so, we try to break down, well, what do we want the next menu to be focused on internationally, and we start to go, develop different ideas and say, what did your grandmother cook, or what did your mom cook, and that is where we rely on their taste, and we kind of go to them when we make something that's specific to their region and say, does this remind you of what you expect it to, and if it doesn't, then we really try to figure it out. It's an amazing evolution.
Right. I remember reading Danielle Balud's book, Letters to a Young Chef, and he talks about his time cooking in Copenhagen was really important because that time there he learned how to use spices and flavors that he hadn't really been exposed to as much in France. And so
Hmm.
it's really unique having chefs in your kitchen like that from all over the world. That really must bring a lot of influences that maybe you or the other chefs that are high on the totem pole don't even have experience with.
Right? Absolutely. I mean, as an example, our next voyage menu, we have four, as you know, we have four sections of our menu, and one of the sections is called Le Voyage, which means to travel. And so we have this whiteboard in the kitchen, and everybody for the last 2 months has been writing down ideas, and we all decided we want to do Caribbean food next, and because there's a lot of different cultures and ethnicities that are brought to the Caribbean, and how we can kind of incorporate that. What's funny is the director of engineering for the hotel that we're attached to, who has nothing to do with the restaurant, is from the Caribbean islands. And I walked up to him the other day and I said, "Do you have a really good jerk recipe from one of maybe your wife or your mom or your grandmother?" And I just saw him in the hallway today before I got on this call, and he says, "I got that recipe for you. I can't wait to bring it up to you." So you have to realize now, we're gonna make the recipe, and the person who's gonna taste that recipe for us to basically let us know if we're in the right direction is the director of engineering, because he grew up with it. So we're going to learn so much about that taste from him. And he's not a professional cook, but he understands what the flavor should be, because he's lived with that flavor his whole life, and he's understood it. And so we kind of, as the chefs here, we really collaborate, and we also want to really learn as much as we can to then help educate the guest as well.
It's incredible. I read a quote from you. You said being a chef is the only job where you can go out, have a great glass of champagne and a meal, and you're learning. And
Mm-hmm.
it's awesome that in the career of cooking, you're always learning so much. It's like if you ever stop learning, that's when you should retire. And it's amazing to me that these great chefs, you included in this, is they all understand that while they are wonderful cooks and chefs, there's so much that they can learn. And yeah, for instance, you learning from this guy from the Caribbean. I mean, he's not a chef, but you're going to bring him in, and hopefully he's going to be able to teach you guys things that maybe you could never have learned if he hadn't have been there.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's constant. And what's amazing, too, is when you get around, chefs like Danielle, who have been in this industry for so long, and especially when I'm at the Bocuse d'Or and I'm around all of these amazing chefs from around the world who have been in the industry for 30-plus years, and you got to eat with them, and you watch them eat, and you still see that same excitement and energy and passion and drive to learn about the food that they're eating. Even if they think that they know what it is, they still ask the question. They're still curious. It's still always why. Why did you do it like this? Or, okay, how did you make that happen? And I just find that so inspiring, because you realize that it's not something that should ever go away, and it should always be at the forefront of your process of continuing to learn as a cook and as a chef, and really help teach others as well.
Yeah, the excitement, it's always got to be there of eating. And when you said that story of going with these real masters and eating, I remember a time when I was at Trugro in France, there was this breakfast sandwich that they would serve, and it was just simple bread with prosciutto, and they had basil and cheese. And
Mm-hmm.
I cooked the breakfast with the chef for like 3 or 4 days, and I would get there at 2:30 in the morning, and I would stay until 1 in the afternoon. And I remember one day at about noon, Pierre Trugro, who now is 80 or something, he was the first chef, along with his brother Jean, as you know, to get 3 Michelin stars for Trugro. And actually, you'd mentioned Bocuse has the longest 3-star rating in the world. I think that Trugro has the second longest 3-star Michelin rating in the world, which is like 43 years or something insane. And I remember watching Pierre eat that sandwich, and I thought to myself, I wonder if he's tasting the same thing that I'm tasting, because obviously his palate is so much further refined than mine. It's like I'm tasting the prosciutto, but I wonder if he's tasting maybe the acorns that those pigs were eating, or something else that was growing next to that basil, or the grass that the cow was eating that the cheese was made from. And that excitement for wondering, spurred me to continue tasting, continue learning, that hopefully someday I could even be, halfway as knowledgeable as he would be, which I probably will never reach that. But it is amazing going to eat with these people and wondering what's really going through their mind, and to still see excitement.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, a chef can tell anybody as they turn their palate off when they'll, every once in a while, but it's pretty hard to do that, because it doesn't make a difference. You still, you taste it, and it's all, you always ask yourself the same question when you taste stuff. So, you're always thinking about those things, and I'm sure he was probably tasting that sandwich different than anybody, and I'm sure he does consistently, and he asks those questions to himself, and probably walked around the corner, and if he didn't like the prosciutto, probably had somebody order a different prosciutto right away.
Yeah, it's just wow. You talk in an interview about when you worked at L'Escargot in London for Marco Pierre White. Mm-hmm. He would come in and he would look at the menu and look at each dish, and then he would close his eyes and imagine the dish, and he could tell you texturally or flavor-wise what needed to be changed, what needed to be added, what needed to be taken away. How did he ever get to that point? Is that a natural ability, or is that really from doing it over and over and over? I mean, are there other people that can do that?
I think Marco is he's a pretty exceptional person. I mean, I think in that case, I think he's kind of a genius. I mean, we never spent a lot of time in the kitchen with him, but the short time we did, he would do things like that, and he would understand the flavor before you built the flavor, so to speak. And that may have just been the way that he thought, but I think that he just was so far ahead of his time that it was unfathomable to understand how he could do that. And I was young. I was 22, I think, when I was working for him. But just when I remember watching him and watching the chef, the executive chef of the restaurant with him, and seeing those two kind of go back and forth on the dishes. And it was like they were speaking a language that I didn't understand, even though I was cooking that food, and it was like, wait a minute, how do they know that it needs that if they haven't even tasted it yet?
It's like being in a kitchen, you don't understand the language.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they could anticipate what the problem would be, or where the lack of flavor would be in the dish before the dish was even created. But it's that taught me a lot. I mean, it made me understand food differently. I will say that, there's no question. I mean, I can read a dish on paper that we might want to do as a special or on the menu, and I'll do the same thing. I'll kind of close my eyes and think about the food, and you think about the way that the guest is going to eat it. And that was the other thing I never really thought about back then. But Marco would almost think, and a lot of chefs still do, that they think, how's the guest going to eat it, and is the silverware going to rest correctly on the plates if they take a break, or how's the sauce going to be on the plate after it gets walked to the dining room. All of those things change the way that your experience is in a restaurant, and it's very, very important for us to be knowledgeable on that, and also to be very aware of that.
You talked about how when you were working for Marco Pierre White, you worked from 7 a.m., you'd go in, and you would get home around 2 a.m. So that's, maybe 5 hours of sleep. I know you said you hadn't had breakfast with your wife in over 3 years. The first time you had breakfast with her was actually when you came back to the U.S.
Yeah.
How could you keep that pace? That's just, how were you able to sustain? Was it really your love for learning and wanting to be the best, and know that this was making such a dramatic influence on your career that you were able to sustain that?
I don't think at the time I thought that. I mean, I'd love to tell you I did. I think at the time I was just naive and crazy and thought, what the hell, let's go for it. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I was working in London, I mean, I was so tired all the time because of those hours. One night I fell asleep, and I woke up when my alarm went off. And the alarm went off at 5:45, and I left my home at 6:15 to get to work by 7. So 5:45, my alarm goes off, and I wake up. I didn't actually wake up. I was dreaming. And I had dreamt that my fingerling potatoes for my station were stuck inside of my alarm clock. And I was scared out of my mind that I wasn't going to get them. So I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and I disassembled my alarm clock while I was sleeping, trying to find the fingerling potatoes. my wife woke up. She's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "My fingerling potatoes in there." She kind of slapped me out of my sleep, and I woke up, and I was like, "I'm going to work." I mean, I had no idea and I used to talk about food all, like when I'd be sleeping, you know, I'd wake everybody up because I'd be like, fire the salmon, drop the fish, give me the couscous, and this is in the middle of my sleep, everyone's like, what is he talking about?
Oh.
Yeah, but it's just, I think a lot of it's, as you know, for training in swimming and being the athlete that you are, you go through phases of your career where you look back on it and you think to yourself, what was I thinking? There's no way I would ever be able to endure that same sort of pressure and lack of sleep and fatigue that I could now, that I was doing then. I couldn't do it now. And I think you just look back on it and you think to yourself, I'm better for it. It made me a better cook. It made me a better person. It made me understand the sacrifice of things, and it made me really understand, the passion behind it. I mean, that was one of the most passionate kitchens I've ever worked in my life. Those guys that worked in that kitchen, I mean, they worked the same hours as I did. And, one kid worked there for 10 years. 10 years. That's insane.
Yeah, it is your life. And actually, I was thinking about this yesterday. As I was writing an article about kind of my early time in swimming. I look back now and I think all the things that I did and went through and how many practices I went to. And I think there's no way I could go back to doing that. Now that I know what I know, and now that I'm at this place, when you go to the Olympics or you compete at the Bocuse d'Or or whatever, you don't really think about all that it took to get there because you were young and you were naive and you were just in it for the passion, for the love. And for me, it wasn't really until I was at the Olympics on the awards podium for that 400 freestyle relay that I really looked back and said to myself, all those morning practices, all those times getting up when I didn't want to go, when I was tired, every little bit of that was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is that we're very goal-driven people. And that's what you look for. You set your goal and you say, that's it, I'm going for it. And I think that's one of the things that continues to push athletes, continues to push chefs and people in general. And I always tell my cooks that, and I'm always my sous chefs. I'm always like, set goals. Put 5 goals on a piece of paper and put it in your wallet and believe in them and look at them and remind yourself what you're doing and why you're there for it. Because I think that's incredibly important. I remember in 2002 when I was working in California at Domaine Chandon, a good friend of mine who was also a cook at the restaurant, we had taken a food and wine magazine and we had ripped it in half, and he took the wine part, I took the word food, and we put it in our wallets, and we promised each other that we wouldn't take it out of our wallets until one of us was on the cover of the magazine for a Best New Chef. And then 5 years later in 2007, when I got that award, I took that out of my wallet and I framed it and I gave it to the editor-in-chief, Dana Cowan, at Food and Wine, because to me the goal had been achieved, and that was that in my mind was always kind of a way for me to look at myself and say, listen, you can do this, you can go after it, you can get it. It doesn't matter, where you're cooking or how far away from New York City you were at the time, because I was in San Diego when I had won that. It was just you set that goal and you go for it. I mean, that's, and I think people understand that. They feel it. I mean, I remember when you won that race, I was here, and I'd gone home from work and I was watching in my apartment. I mean, it was one of the few sports moments where I literally got up out of my couch screaming. I was so excited and couldn't wait to see you guys win it. And that's the thing. It's like I think everybody felt that, and it's an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and the really important thing I think to remember is that dreams really do come true. You're a testament to that. So many people are a testament to that. And like you said, it took you 5 years to get that, not to mention all the years you'd spent in Europe before that, in Minnesota before that. I mean, you started at Subway. Who knows what would have... there was no way to know that you would have been one of the best new chefs in America in 2007. And that's just a testament to your dedication. And I really try and drive this home to everyone that when you love something, when you're passionate about it, and you dedicate yourself to a specific goal, it's insane what we really can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more powerful than people give it credit for.
Yeah, and I want to move to something that you just hinted on, which is, I think, one of the most important and inspiring parts in the culinary world for me is mentorship. And I've seen
Mhm.
it to obviously a much lesser degree than you have, because I haven't spent nearly the amount of time you have in a kitchen, but I've apprenticed in some of these kitchens and seen the care that these older chefs take in teaching the younger chefs and showing them the right way to do it and helping them understand how to taste and to cut something and to braise something correctly. And it is such an important aspect, and really you as a chef are only as good as the cooks working for you. And so
Mhm.
you mentoring them is such a huge deal. And I know you had many great mentors in California and Switzerland. You know, Danielle is, I'm sure, a great mentor for you. Now, talk to me about how those mentors played a role in your career, and then how are you taking what you've learned and passing that down to the generations below you?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is, my really the only time that I've kind of given my resume out was really to get my first job at Domaine Chandon, or my first internship. And then after that, it was kind of like the the chef would then take me under their wing and then tell me where to go next. And so then I would just go there, and I mean, I'd try to have to give them my resume, but it wasn't an interview. It wasn't the formal, here's my cover letter, here's my resume, let's do a stage, let's see if we like each other. It was kind of like, all right, well, you've been endorsed by this guy, so we're going to take you in. Give me the resume just so I can put it in the records, And what I didn't understand then, which I now understand more than any other time in my life, is that as a young cook, you're looking up to that chef, and you're saying, okay, they've made it. They've made it to a position in their career and in their life where they seem to be happy. Now, what is it that I have to do to get beyond that? Because in all instances, you kind of want to be better, right, than the person next to you, so to speak. And I realized that by understanding who that chef was that I was working for, and seeing exactly where they were taking me, that they would just kind of take me and have the best idea of where I should go next, because they understood what skills I lacked. They saw what I was good at, but it's not about what you're good at. It's about it's about the skills that you lacked and where you needed to go to be tested on those skills. And I look back at the places that I work now, and I think to myself, boy, they really kind of threw me for a loop. I mean, I remember when I first started to work for Marco, I was in pastries. I mean, it was crazy. It was like I went from being a line cook to a pastry cook, and I thought to myself, this is nuts. And I look back at that now, and I thought that was one of the most beneficial things I did in my career, because it made me understand food differently. It made me understand the pastry chef differently. And I look at the cooks that I have now, even the sous chefs that I have now, and I have one sous chef who's been with me for almost 9 years, and he started with me as an intern when he was 19 years old. And he's been with me the whole time, and he's gone off to a couple of other places in between. I've sent him to other restaurants for a year here, a year there, to, again, give him the skills that he had lacked and have him work on those. And you realize that when you're in that position to help people kind of create what they want their dream to be, you can't take that for granted, number one. And number two, they're looking up to you, and you need to deliver, and you need to know what that means. And I think it's this is one of those industries where, you call your buddy up and you say, hey, yeah, I know you're the chef for the third best restaurant in the world. I have a kid who wants to come work for you. Can you make it happen? And the answer is usually, sure, no problem. We'll take care of it. And that's what blows me away, is that when you make that phone call and they're like, yeah, no problem, we'll take care of that. And then that cook goes there and, you've changed their life completely. And you just kind of can't wait to see it unfold in front of your eyes a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost like you're mentoring and nurturing these chefs and young people to be great people and great citizens more than you are being great chefs. And my coach, Eddie Reese at Texas, he's coached, I mean, countless Olympians and gold medalists, and he always focuses on helping people make the right life decisions and helping them make as big a difference as they can in the world around them, because he feels that in turn, they'll be great swimmers. He always says, take care of school and school will take care of the rest. And it's interesting. I've been in environments and kitchens where it seems like people motivate in a negative manner and almost teach in a forceful way. And then, for instance, there's this guy Torsten who works at Noma, and he creates a lot of the dishes. And when I was working with him, I know I was doing so many things wrong, and I'm not a great chef by any means. I'm not a great cook in these kitchens because this is their profession, and I'm not at that level. But he would nurture me in a way that would make me believe, I was getting better. I was doing things somewhat of a right way. Hey, just keep doing it like this. You're getting there. And that positive reinforcement and the way he framed it kept me motivated. And it was almost like I wanted to do a good job to make him proud.
Right. Well, and I think that's a big part of it now, too, is I think the industry has changed from that motivation before. It used to be a fear factor, and you were supposed to be scared to go to work, and you were supposed to be scared to make the mistakes because then you wouldn't make it. But I think what people are realizing quickly is that the collaboration effort, the relationship that you can have with your sous chefs and with your cooks is so much more refreshing and so much more better for the environment of the kitchen and for the environment of the guest, because I really believe that environment kind of spills into the dining room. And if you don't have that sort of understanding and that nurturing relationship, I mean, when we make a menu here, I mean, it's not like I sit down and make the whole menu and then say, okay, guys, let's cook it. I mean, we sit down with everybody. We say, okay, let's talk about it. What do we want to make? And it's a discussion. It's an argument. It's a debate. It's a very passionate and heated discussion on what we want to create, because everybody has something that they can bring to the table, and I think it's really important. I've always thought that it's really important that you try to find the voice inside of everybody a little bit to get what they want for their food, because if they leave Cafe Boulud, we don't want them to go off and make Cafe Boulud food, right? We want them to go off and make their own food, because that's what's going to make our industry better. That's what's going to make America's cuisine and culture better, is if they go out there and they make their own food. And a testament to that is look at the Scandinavians. I mean, if you look at the Danish and the Swedes and the Norwegians, I mean, they've really stepped up and they've done it a different way than a lot of people have seen it. It's not new to them. That's not something that they just came up with. It's something that they've been doing for years and years and years. It's just nobody's paid attention because there really weren't enough people doing it. And now that there's so many of them doing it, people are really paying attention to it for the right reason.
It's like you're helping people take ownership for the work that they're doing and the food they're creating, so that when they have ownership for it, they care about it more. They nurture that ingredient more, and they end up with a better product than they would if they were just cooking Gavin Kaysen's food.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. Let's say we do a crab salad, and I come up with a dish and don't ask for any input from anybody, and I go to the gourmet cook and I say, this is what you're going to make, and walk away. If that cook is putting out the 500th crab salad of their life, for the guests, it's the first time they've seen it. That's their first impression. So if they have no ownership to that crab salad, if they have no care or no passion to that crab salad, how can you possibly expect them to put the same care and passion that you have to? And then ultimately it gets translated to the guests. You can't. You've got to be. They have to be a part of that process.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so this is where I want to go last. The seasonal aspect of cooking is so important now. Everyone talks, we got to cook what season. Obviously, this is how we should be eating. It's how our ancestors always ate. You say that the food at Cafe Boulud, where you cook and you are in charge, is fanatically seasonal. What does that mean to be fanatically seasonal?
Well, we really focus a lot on what can we have now. I'll give you a perfect example. The other day it was 60 degrees here in New York City, which is crazy for February, considering yesterday it was like 20. But it was 60 degrees in February, and I was getting calls saying, when's the pea soup going to come on? Because we always do the pea soup during the spring season. And so I always have to explain to them every year. I just say, the peas aren't ready yet. Just because it's hot one day,
it's still
just
winter.
not ready yet. Yeah, we have to wait. And I always love the question, well, what date is the menu going to change? Spring's March 20th. Is the new menu going to be March 20th? Well, I hope so. I would love for it to be that, but Mother Nature's really in charge of what that's going to be. And we find ourselves making, especially the winter to spring transition, is probably a little bit more difficult. I mean, we'll have to make a change where that there's still a few winter vegetables on the menu, and then there's some spring vegetables on the menu, because we're just waiting for that transition to happen. We want to be able to respect the ingredient. We want to be able to make sure that we're getting the best out of that ingredient. because we don't like to manipulate it too much. So if it's a pea soup, we want to make sure that we're getting the freshest peas, the freshest pea tendrils, and all of that that's going to go into the soup. So that way when you taste it, it's not starchy. It doesn't have sort of that texture on your palate where you can feel the grainy and grittiness of the peas because they're not fully developed yet. It's funny. I mean, that's a soup just like tomato gazpacho is, where even when you cook that through the season and the peak of the season, it changes its flavor week after week, just slightly, because the peas are getting better and better and better, and then you see them fall short.
You talk about how you grew up in Minnesota and you thought beets came from a can. And it wasn't until you moved to California that you realized, oh, beets actually grow in the ground. How do we help people get to the point where they're realizing what's cooking in the earth around them, what's growing in Mother Nature? And I think this is something that's so critical to helping people become healthier, is knowing what's around them and eating more whole foods that are not processed. And cooking seasonal and buying seasonal ingredients is so important to that. But you're a chef, you're around purveyors, you're around people who are farmers. How do we take most of the people who are living in cities and convince them or make them understand that there are seasonal products they can buy nearby and there are simple ways that they can cook them? How do we get people to have that epiphany and make it important to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, and that's one of the struggles that, everybody seems to kind of try to figure out the answer to, and I think everybody's life is very different in that sense. I know, for me, like you said, I'm around food all the time. I'm around these purveyors and these farmers, so it's very accessible to me, and I understand it. But when my wife and I had our first son, and he's 3.5 now, there was a point, a couple of months, maybe 8 months ago, where he just wouldn't eat anything, and that's fine. I mean, they're going to go through that phase where it's like he just wanted plain white rice or plain pasta. And then we went to go visit a friend of mine in Maine, and she grows all of her own produce that she eats for her house. So she walked out. She said, "Okay, Emil, let's go pick this produce." So they picked cucumbers and green beans, and they pulled the potatoes out of the ground. And then, he helped pick the green beans, and he helped peel the cucumber. And my son, who would only eat white rice 1 week before that, sat down and had a leg of lamb grilled with green beans, some fried potatoes from the ground, and a cucumber salad with dill dressing, and he cleaned his plate. Yeah. And I looked at my wife in disbelief, and I was like, "What was it?" And she's like, "We got to bring him to the market." So then we would go to the market every Saturday, and he would pick out what he wanted. And then on Sunday night, he would cook it with me. He wouldn't cook; he'd just stand next to me, and I would cook. And he would clean his plate. It didn't matter if it was artichokes, olives, green beans, sardines. Wow. It didn't matter. As long as he saw and understood where it came from, I think he needed that relationship. He needed to know that it wasn't just some generic bought thing. I mean, it was like he really wanted to see where it was from. And that changed the way that he ate, and it changed the way we cooked for him. And it was kind of an eye-opener for me, because I thought to myself, wow, that's an incredible way to approach it. It's easy to get that connection if you just let yourself get that connection and go out there and visit the farmers markets and talk to those people and, see what it is that they're developing for you to eat and why it's so beneficial for you to eat that.
It's like we have to become in touch with what's around us. I have a 5-year-old godson named Joe, and he's got a garden in his backyard. And I remember when he was 3, he's walking out there tearing a piece of mustard green off, chomping on it. Mm-hmm. He picked one of his dad's only tomatoes and just took a big bite out of it before it was ripe. His dad just about had a heart attack. He's like, "My only tomato is gone." But I mean, this kid, from a young age, when they get in contact with where their food is coming from, it's so important to them. And I just actually finished a campaign in Austin to raise money for a school garden here. And I went out to the garden with these kids, and to watch them get excited about picking food and eating it and finding bugs and feeding the bugs to the chickens and knowing what an aquifer is, it was just so cool to see that connection with these kids. And maybe that's the difference we need to make, is starting them younger. Like you said with your son, he found that connection. He saw where the food was growing, and all of a sudden he wanted to eat that. He saw the benefit, even at such a young age.
Yeah, I think it is. I think a lot of it is just that, starting them out young and understand, also understanding that their palate is going to change. I mean, there's, in 2 weeks he could go back to the white rice and pasta again and just be totally over it, but there has to be, and part of that might be George's influence on me, but, there has to be sort of a little bit of that understanding of just try it, just taste it. If you don't like it, that's fine, but just taste it, and let's see if we can understand it together. And I think that's the thing. It's patience, and it's starting them out young. And I think that if you're an adult now and you've never done that before, it doesn't mean you can't go and start to do that now. I mean, I think that's the other thing. Is like go out there and visit those farmers and see what they're growing and what they're trying to produce, because it's an exceptionally different product that is so much better for you and so much more healthy for your body, and it's intended for you to eat it. It's not intended to sit on the shelf for 3 weeks and then become ripe.
Yeah. Well, in keeping with this, part of this podcast is every week I'm going to create a recipe inspired by my guest. So what's something that's going to come into season around March, April that you really love that I could create a recipe inspired by you?
Well, usually in the end of March, we always find, I'm always really excited because it reminds me of my grandmother. I'm always really excited about rhubarb.
Oh my gosh. My grandma made the best rhubarb pie. That's actually my first food memory ever, is her rhubarb pie.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
It's a Midwestern thing, I think.
I think so. And every time end of March, early April rolls around, I always see rhubarb, in our kitchen, and I always ask my pastry chef to make a rhubarb pie for us for family meal.
Yeah.
Because it just has this exceptional smell in the kitchen. It's a childhood memory. I mean, it's that selfishly simple. It's just an amazing childhood memory that I have. I mean, at the restaurant here, we're going to pair it. We'll probably do some sort of pate paired with rhubarb or a foie gras torchon or something like that. But we're going to use rhubarb somehow, whether we're going to pickle it or make a puree or a gelée or something with it, or all of it.
All right, well that will be a challenge. I'm not going to make a rhubarb pie. I don't want to give my grandma's secret fantastic recipe away, but I will come up with something with rhubarb. And that will be my recipe inspired by you. So to just finish off here, I'm going to ask you 10 kind of quick fire questions that I'm going to ask each guest just to get a little bit of information further about you and just so we can compare everyone's personalities. So what brings you to your ultimate level of happiness?
Family.
Family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what brings you down? What takes you to a lower place emotionally?
Not being able to cook. I mean, even if I go on vacation, if I go on a 2-week vacation, as an example, I have to find time in that vacation where I'm just in the kitchen cooking. It just calms me down. It brings me to the level that I need to be at.
What scares you?
Failure.
Honestly, I could have sworn that you would say that. And to be honest, that is the thing that scares me most in life. Yep. Thinking that I'm a failure is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, again, I mean, I think you and I are very similar in the sense we're so goal-driven that if you set the goal and you fail, it's failure.
What profession have you always thought you'd be good at?
That's a great question because I've never thought about any other profession as much. But when I was younger, when I was a child and growing up in Minnesota, I always thought that I was going to be a businessman like my dad and travel a lot. But I never really knew what that meant. Although growing up in Minnesota, I was always inspired to be a storm chaser because we always had so many storms.
Yeah,
I always thought
sure.
it so fascinating to see the clouds so different.
Who's your real life hero?
My real life hero. Probably my grandmother, she's now passed away, but she was the one that inspired me to cook, and I mean, everything that she went through in life, she went through a lot, and she still inspired so many people around her to this day, and it's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know your first food memory was those cookies and that connection with hospitality. That's a special thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were a superhero, what would your power be?
I think if I were a superhero, I would choose to be somebody like Superman, because his is so. I like his power because he can use it as much or as little as he wants to, and he doesn't really have to change too much. You know, he can still do it in a business suit and be fine.
So he's still a businessman on the side.
That's right, exactly. He can. It's just a hobby for him, a hobby to save the world.
Must be nice to have that hobby.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet, sour, savory, or bitter?
Which is my favorite?
Yeah.
Probably sour, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
So what would be a sour food?
I like acidic.
What would be a sour food you really like?
You know, when Granny Smith apples still have that sour tinge to them, there's a bit of sweetness, but you get that hint of sour in the back, and it kind of makes your cheeks clench up. I love that.
Oh, not me.
I love it. I think it's so refreshing.
You like the pucker, huh?
Yeah, I do. It cleans me out. Maybe that has something to do with just eating a lot of heavy and rich foods all day. When I go home, I prefer to have something that's more on the sour side than on anything savory.
What's your favorite meal? What's your most memorable meal?
You know, honestly, I think probably my most memorable meal was when I first ate at the French Laundry, and I say that because when I moved out to Napa Valley, I lived in a house with 10 people, and there was a young lady who lived there, and she said, I work at this restaurant down the street called the French Laundry. And I said, I've never heard of it before. This was in 2000. And she said, well, you should come in sometime. I said, well, my parents are here. I'd love to come in for lunch tomorrow. She said, yeah, it's kind of a tough reservation to get, but let me see what I can do. And we went in. We had lunch there. We actually ended up getting the reservation. We went in and had lunch. It was the first time I had met Thomas because he was still in the kitchen at that point. But the reason that meal was so memorable to me was because I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who the restaurant was. I didn't know what it stood for. I didn't know how much was put into that thought and that care. And I just remember walking away from that meal thinking to myself, that was one of the most exceptional experiences of my life. It wasn't just the food, it was the entire experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you say it's an experience, because when you dine at some place like that, it really isn't a meal.
No, it's not.
So what's your favorite food adjective? You know, when you're sitting at the French Laundry, what would you say when you taste something enters your mouth that is just blank?
You know, I think you nailed it earlier when you said you wanted to cry or jump up and shout at the top of your lungs how amazing it was. I think it's less of an adjective and more of the action. Because I think that's what food does to you. Is I think it changes emotionally who you can be. Because there's times when you eat that food and you think to yourself, how is it like that? I mean, it just seems so simple. And then you put it in your mouth and it blows your mind away. And you're just like, whatever you thought you knew, you don't know. I think the humility of that is what's so incredible.
It's amazing what food can do. That's what keeps me coming back over and over and over. And for me, food is not only sustenance, and it's not only something that emotionally makes me feel good, but it fuels us for being able to follow our passions. And for me, it really made a difference in my career as a swimmer. So, lastly, what's the one thing you try to do every day to make the world a better place?
Honestly, I try to get up, be thankful of everything that I have around me. My family, my 2 children, and the job that I have now. But really, what I try to do every single day is I try to just make the next day better than what I did today. And I think about that all the time. I think about the people that work here and how we can help shape and change the way that they are, and by giving them a chance that otherwise they wouldn't be able to have, that they've created for themselves because they're here for a reason. And I think that's an exceptional accomplishment that they've been able to come to, and we're just happy to be able to share it with them.
Gavin, I can't thank you enough. You're my first podcast. I appreciate you being on. All your insight was tremendous. Thanks so much, and we'll see and talk to you soon.
All right, Garrett. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks. I want to thank Gavin Kaysen for chatting with me today. God, that guy is interesting. He has lived an incredible life. So much more to come from that guy. You can learn more about Gavin Kaysen at gavinkaysen.com. That's Kaysen. Or you can visit fortheloveoffoodpodcast.com for complete links. You can also find that at AthleticFoodie.com. Again, as I mentioned, I'll have an inspired recipe from Gavin Kaysen. Actually, it's from me, but it's inspired by Gavin Kaysen. That'll go up at fortheloveoffoodpodcast.com. You can find me on Twitter at GWeber-Gale, WeberGale. Thanks for listening, and remember, dreams do come true.